All right, so my next session is about gifted and talented missing records. So I just want to explain right off the bat that records do not automatically import into a student's GT record or into the Infinite Campus system. When a student transferred, records are released, and there is a GT, and if there's a GT record, the Kentucky State Import Wizard, which I talked about earlier in my other presentation, will be blue, indicating there are records. If there's a GT record, Save must be clicked to import the record to the participation tool. So when you click on that Kentucky State Reporting Import Wizard, there may be several PDF documents that are underneath that. To me, it seems like it's underneath. They're listed there, and so you'll scroll through, and you may see a GT record for that student. And if you see a GT record for that student, then you need to click Save. And once that's done, it will populate that participation tool. All this information is in the records transfer data standard. But we have had, staff come and go for different reasons. And so it's been my experience over the years that every year the new KSIS contact needs to familiarize himself with this process, and then also communicate this information to those staff who work with enrollment of students. It's very important that you don't miss importing those records, because when we're not importing those records, then we're not serving students. The staff that are in the district don't know they have a new student. So it's important that we all communicate well together. The GT State Consultant, that's me right now, I receive a report once a week about the records that have not been imported. And so once each semester in the fall and the spring, I will contact the GT coordinator with an email that lists those records that have not been imported or are missing to try to help those in the district. This email is going to include the SSID number, the school, the grade, and the type of record that's missing. Right, so what do you do if you've got a missing record? Well, here we go. You've got to determine the issue. So after you find the student in Infinite Campus, look to see if the record has been released. That's been part of the issue, I think, is that districts don't realize that when the student transferred, that the previous district released the records, and one of those records is the gifted and talented record. However, like I said before, if you don't go and click on the Kentucky State Reporting Import Wizard, that record that's been released to you is not imported, because as I said before, it doesn't automatically import. So see if the record was released. If it's not released, then where did the student transfer from? Or if there is a record, what evidence is missing? Because that can be an issue too. And if you can't see where the student was previously enrolled, feel free to contact me and I will help you with that. All right, so let's talk about original records. So if you have a student that has an X beside their record, this indicates the student was identified in the district. This means there is a different record from the one listed for the student in Infinite Campus. If there's a record out there that maybe the student came from a different district and they have records that need to be imported, and maybe since they've been in your district you didn't know, and you've also identified them, maybe in the same category or maybe a different category, but that student is missing a record. All right, missing evidence. When you have missing evidence, this means that there is evidence such as like the ninth stay-9 that might be missing, or maybe or maybe the special considerations checkbox is not checked. So, if you've got the record, but we're still getting an error message, then look at the student's record, check their documentation to see if one of these boxes needs to be checked, and then correct the record. And usually the ninth stay-9 is for students who've been identified for general intellectual ability, which is GIA, or specific academic aptitude. Okay, so If there is no 9th evidence and special considerations has not been checked, as I said before, research the student's documentation. If there is no documentation for either evidence, more research will need to occur. If the student doesn't have any 9th documentation that's been sent with them from the previous district, or excuse me, if the student has 9th documentation from the previous district, update the GT record evidence box. If there's not any documentation, contact the previous district for documentation. If they don't have any documentation, contact the district where the student was originally identified. For assistance with that, feel free to contact me. I'm glad to help you with those contacting, where the student was identified. So let's talk about multiple GT records. If the student has a GT record and evidence is not missing, look back in the email that was sent regarding the record, because as I said before, a student can have multiple records if they've been identified in multiple categories. And the student may have records from another district that were not released or imported. All right, records request. If the student is missing a GT record, check with the enrollment staff to see if the GT record was released. If it was released and not imported, like we talked about before, save was not clicked, ask the staff to import the record. However, if the record was not released, ask your KSIS contact to send a records request through Infinite Campus to release the record. If you're not sure who to contact to ask for this records request, you may use the KDE Open House directory to find the name of the contact and the information. And again, if you're not sure, who to contact about that, please contact me because I can help you with that. I can see all records that the student has in Infinite Campus. All right, a student records transfer. So if the record was not released, but the previous district has the GT record, the KSIS contact or the staff with the records transfer permission should use the process outlined in the Student Records Transfer Data Standard. If the current record is not the original record, delete the duplicate record and ensure the original record is released and imported. You may want to contact me before doing that just to make sure that it is a duplicate record. Once the record is imported, a gifted student service plan should be created for the student and families notified of services. If the previous district does not have the student's missing GT record, this usually means number one, the previous district did not import the record, or two, the previous district could not import the record because the district before them did not release the record. Records can only be transferred from the previous district. If the records are not released and imported, the next district cannot import the records. However, there is a help for this. Determine where the record was originally created and send a new state transfer request to the district. And you'll see those tools in Infinite Campus, especially if you're the KSIS contact. Then when the record is released, import the record using the steps in the Student Records Transfer Data Standard. So all is not lost. There is a good tool to help you with this. Once a record has been transferred, request copies of the identification documentation for the GT record. If the district does not use the GSSP or progress report from Infinite Campus, you may want to request copies of those too. If the previous district does not have identification documentation for the student, the current district should begin collecting identification documentation for the student. The gifted regulation states that for a student to be identified for gifted and talented program, they must meet the regulation criteria to be eligible for services. Right, so again, a lot of information covered there. Does anybody have any questions?
Kathy, I don't have any questions that have come in.
All right. Well, I know that was a lot of information. I think I was supposed to go till noon, but maybe we're going to give some time back to people. Um, Please feel free to reach out to me if you think of some questions later. There is my contact information. Again, I'm always really glad to work with people, and or you can, when you contact me, we can set up time for a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, whichever that you would like. I'm always really glad to help. So